But now you have a bunch of social media posts that were made independently. Well, those become ideas for blog posts. Those become ideas for white papers. They can become an email subject line. You don't have to start everything from scratch.
All right. Hey, welcome to episode 250. And I am honored to have Joshua Altman here with Beltway Media. And Josh, you're out of what, Washington?
Out of the DC area.
DC area. Okay. And we're excited. We're gonna listen to Josh's background. He's got some great things that can help a lot of you out there. And he'll get into the nitty-gritty and how he works and what processes he can bring to your businesses. So with no further ado, Joshua Altman, hit it.
Hey, thanks for having me. So yeah, Keith Head, I am Joshua Altman, Managing Director of Beltway Media. We are fractional chief communications officers. And what we do is we help companies with two primary things. One is shaping perception, two, build and maintain trust. And that's with all your stakeholders. And we use that with a big picture view of how messaging impacts your reputation, your growth, and your stakeholder confidence.
Cool. And you're you work with a lot of or have worked with a lot of different public public and governmental agencies. Do you want to jump into who you've worked with in the past?
Yeah. So in the past, I've worked with the U.S. Department of Justice, primarily with a branch called the Community Relations Service. And with that, it was doing a lot of their internal stuff, also a lot of their external communications as well, along with a lot of interagency work. So what that means with government is across the U.S. Department of Justice. So us, the Community Relations Service, the Executive Office of U.S. Attorneys, the FBI, DEA, all of those agencies. I've also been with the Department of Commerce, working with Economic Development Administration, and they fund a lot of businesses, public-private partnerships in every sector across the U.S., from small grants of $10,000 to massive, multi-million dollar projects.
Crazy, crazy. And as far as the private sector, I mean, and that's got to be fascinating working with the government side of things. Um, are there any special projects you'd want to talk about or any specifics, or do you got to kill us before?
Don't have to kill you. But we work across industries, everything from green energy and, blockchain tech to, IT firms to service, professional services, law firms, accounting, healthcare, all of that. So it's a range. We focus on, the private sector business, really where you are, as opposed to a particular industry.
So you've talked about that before, where you are. So, maybe you could speak to that pain. So is there a certain either revenue threshold or growth dynamic that you jump in and say, here, I can help you out?
There's no real threshold. It's not a magic number as much where you would either start with us or kind of end with us. It's really where you are and where you need to be. So a lot of times, especially with startups or really smaller businesses, especially things like professional services firms, you know, law, healthcare, things like that, you're going to see it's a lot of, I'm the founder, this is my company, I started this, I built the website, using Wix or whatever, and now I still run our, my LinkedIn and our Instagram, and I want to be doing law. I want to be seeing my patients. I want to be doing what our business does. I don't want to be managing our website anymore. I don't want to be thinking about our marketing because I have a business to do, which is why we say we are the expert at communicating your expertise. So wherever you are, whatever it is you're doing, that's where we come in and we know how to message that.
Okay. So you're going to come in many cases, or you're going to handle their social media and press releases and
Press releases if they need it. A lot of times, a lot of people want them. Is not usually a great strategy because they don't get read very often. So in terms of, for your dollar, it might not be the best unless you have something very specific, that you are working on. A lot of founders think, we just hired, Joe Smith is news. No one's going to cover it because no one knows who you are. No one knows who Joe Smith is. It's not getting in anywhere. We do media training, especially for companies that do, want to do pitch events that, are going and doing, presentations to investors. These companies who are now, at the seed, pre-series A type range, and they're looking for help with their decks to talk to investors because they know they have to do it, but these are engineers. They don't make decks. They don't message that to venture capitalists. It's a different thing that they do, and they know their product inside and out. But how do they explain that in 30 seconds to someone who doesn't? And that's what we help them with. And one of the things we tell them is just practice it. Practice your 30 seconds, while you're driving, while you're brushing your teeth, run it through. And that's your timing, run one version, run two version, run three versions. You might have a 30-second, 90-second, 2-minute version. These, you get them down cold.
Yeah, and that's a tough, it's just a tough skill for any of us to acquire, right? Where, you know, I think communication is difficult enough, right? But to do it public facing and to do it at a level that can propel your company forward, that's a whole nother skill set. Sounds like you have.
It's a different skill, and it takes practice like any other skill. Reading a teleprompter, if that's what you have to do for your speeches, that's a skill. That is not an easy thing to do. You see it on TV all the time when you're watching the news. Those people have been doing it for years. I went to journalism school. I went to school with people who you see on, TV news, reading teleprompters. This is a skill that you practice in school. They learn this. And like anything else, it just takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, and a lot of those people, I try to encourage my kids when they're younger. I go, "You need to join the debate team." I go, "It may not be what you wanna do, but it's probably the only thing you're gonna learn in school that will serve you properly, in the future." But, they went on to robotics and disappointed me. No, I'm just kidding. But, so, yeah, this sounds fascinating. How does this kinda integrate with, most of our topics that we talk about here at Local SEO Tactics are more about, let's say, the technical piece of search engine optimization. How can you explain to us how you dovetail that into some of those processes or
So a lot of things we're doing is working with these companies to make their sometimes they come in, their websites are terrible. I love when they come in and their websites are great. A lot of times that's not what we're dealing with. That's why we've been called in. And it's making those websites not just for SEO, but now for, the GEO, generative engine optimization, which thankfully does have a lot of overlap. Although who knows, that could change 3 times before this airs because these are all, black boxes and we don't get to see these algorithms. But thankfully, in most cases, we're doing pretty well in, how that overlaps. Content helps for both, having stuff out there, well ranked, reputable sources, all of that generally is good. We do stuff with ads. One time, we'll see ads that, are working. And then, you know, ad algorithm changes, the keywords, get bought up by someone with a bigger budget and you crash. Well, how do we get around that? What's a strategy to kind of get you back, displaying? And that might be coming up with new terms, finding what people might be searching for that's related, but not. And one of the things I really find with this is there's a huge, confirmation bias. Well, people are finding us because they're searching, dental office in, Poughkeepsie, New York. And that's how they're finding us. But that's how the people who are finding you are finding you. There are a lot of people not finding you who might really want a dental office in Poughkeepsie, New York. So how do we get that group? Because you could get both of them.
Yeah, and that's the art and I guess, one of the questions I have is, so it sounds like you're like a full stack agency in a sense. You're SEO, paid ads, obviously social.
But we do that on both sides. So we'll come in, and if you just need the leadership and the strategy, we're that senior level person who works with, your social media strategy if you have one, a marketing manager if you have one, and we're there in your leadership team. That's why we're fractional. It's, some people need 5 hours a month. Some people need 20 hours a week. It's very different. And some people need the full stack. Some have, someone handling their social media already. And we're not going to replace them if that's what's working for you. We're going to come in and we're going to work with your existing team.
So, and do you find yourself in those situations? In most situations, you have a small business. They, in fact, don't have a team to speak of. Again, the owner's kind of juggling all those balls. Do you kind of come in and
It's a mix. It's a mix. Some have added like a social media strategy. Some are using things like, Fiverr and Upwork to, get people, distributed teams, and these people could be anywhere in the world. So they might have a little bit of both. Where they're doing it, they have also their team who's, from these, freelancer apps. They have, possibly an assistant in the office who's helping with it, but it's not uniform. It's not a strategy. They're just kind of putting stuff out there. And that's kind of where we come in and work with that existing structure as that leadership person. It's very rare that you have to come in and say, we need to rip down everything because there's a lot, you've built something and it is working. As it might not be working in some ways, but in other ways it is. And it might just need, that new vision, that new hand in that leadership role to help guide it along.
what when you come into an organization, are there like common, like 2 or 3 common things that most people are messing up?
Yeah, you touched on one of them. You touched on one of them, which is that you have this founder or, this employee who's been there a while who just sort of is the one doing it. And it's not really their job. They're like the operations director, they're a CTO if they're more of a startup type company, and they've just been doing it and it's their job. One of the things that's, there for them. But it's not their core function. They have a core function and this takes like 5 to 10 hours a week maybe, and that's why they never hired a W-2 full-time employee to do it, because it's not taking enough of their time that it's a full-time employee, so they don't really see mathematically, why should we have a full-time employee doing it? So that's probably the biggest one is this is falling on someone who doesn't want it and wants to be doing their actual job. And another is that they had something that worked. It worked a little bit, maybe isn't working anymore. They want to try it again. And I love doing experiments with projects because that's the only way you find out what works. And just because something worked 6 months ago doesn't mean it will work now. Just because it doesn't work now doesn't mean it won't work in 6 months. There are a lot of factors. What works right now, I don't know, this by the time this airs, right now it's the holiday season. What works in the holiday season might not work in the summer when everyone's at the beach. So it's just very different in that regard. So that's how, people kind of find us is it was working, but now it's not. So if you have like a med spa, get your beach body ready isn't going to be the same in December and August.
Yeah, no, and I was gonna ask you, like, because sometimes we'll jump into, a situation where we have most of the time, marketing directors are pretty cool, but every once in a while, you, like, butt heads with the marketing director. I mean, how do you work with that, so to speak?
So I lay everything out for them. Yeah. Whatever it is, good, bad, ugly, agree, disagree, I lay it all out. Ultimately, it's the founder, it's the owner's company. You know, I deal generally with privately held companies. You know, it's their game, their ball. They make that decision. And I'm their fractional employee. We're going to come in and work with the play they call, but we're going to lay everything out. And there's no I told you so. If it doesn't work, we go back and try something else. You know, that's why we like to start with these smaller scale experiments. And that runs throughout. So you might be running, something big, but also on the side, trying, well, this isn't going to work forever. So what comes next? How do we optimize our email list? If you have, email discounts that go out, when, how do we optimize it? What works best? Refer a friends versus, one-off discounts, things like that. every business is going to be a little different because you're selling different things to different people.
Yeah, it's so how you could take a cut down or a reel, how you present it on, how you present it on, let's say, Instagram is gonna be different how you would present it on, let's say, Twitter. Is that fairly accurate? I mean, that's where you come in, you have that understanding.
Yeah, and actually, we do a lot of that. We do a lot of that. I call them content flights. You start with one thing and you kind of break it down. Also, you build up. So you might have a corporate blog post because you just need to put content out, however often to stay fresh. Well, that can become 3 social media posts across 3 different channels. That's 9. What you put on LinkedIn isn't going to be the same as what you put on Instagram. Isn't going to be the same what you put on Twitter X. So those are different. But now you have a bunch of social media posts that were made independently. Well, those become ideas for blog posts. Those become ideas for white papers. They can become an email subject line. You don't have to start everything from scratch. Someone said, well, to me, well, what if they notice? I'm like, good. They notice. They are paying that close attention that they notice that your tweet was recycled something similar to an email subject line. That person is engaged and probably buying something.
Yeah, I mean, that omnipresence is tough, and I mean, that sounds like what you do, is that omnipresence, right? Where you're trying to get them exposed. I mean, not everybody's good for that strategy, I would assume, but I mean, most people will assume.
Yeah. So we do consistent storytelling across your internal, external channels. So that's everything. Not everyone's going to want or need everything. You know, I'm working with someone who works in, a dance entertainment space.
Yeah.
TikTok is made for that. Not going to do as well on LinkedIn. So those are just very different. We're not going to put a lot of money into LinkedIn when this is someone who has, the content that is perfect for TikTok and to also Instagram and other shorter platforms, YouTube Shorts also. Like it just depends. Not everyone needs to be everywhere. You need to be smart. One thing we tell every single client is communicate strategically, not voluminously.
So, um, a lot of our clients, at least, we try to work with them with Google reviews, and I'm really shocked at different size companies, particularly bigger companies, who don't pay any attention to their Google review scores. Do you run into that, or if you do, how do you, it's a little easier with smaller companies. It's still very difficult with smaller companies because the business owner, at least this was my mindset 10 years ago, was like, look, I've been in business for 20 years. Who needs your Google reviews, right? Um, I don't know if that's the mindset of most business owners, but I mean, how do you deal with that challenge?
I think that's changed a little bit just because Google and Yelp reviews they were big 10 years ago, but I think they've become a little more recognized now, or especially now you have business owners who, they grew up with these scores more. So, and by grew up, I mean, they was in their college and 20s more. Now these are people in their, 30s, 40s and older. So it's a different experience with these scores. I always say you don't, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter, or on LinkedIn, do not respond to all the comments. You can't. Hopefully there's way too much volume for you to do that. When you get a negative, I'm sure you see this all the time, a negative Google or Yelp review, respond because those scores take into account the company's responding and being responsive to, complaints. So those respond to because not doing it could have a negative effect. There are the rare companies that have like a 1-star Google review and they wear that with a badge of honor. It's like, what that's their thing. It doesn't work for most people. A couple, yeah, someone can get away with it, but that's rare.
No, and the thing I try to express to most of our clients, at least, is make it a review culture within your company that, much like Disney, like, your goal is to absolutely serve the customer, but you kinda gotta state a contract, like a verbal contract beforehand and like, "I'm gonna give you great service, and our goal is to give you 5 stars. If we don't, anywhere along the way, please let me know, and we're hoping to get a 5-star review when we get done," or whatever the case is, right? Um,
And part of it is people who go online and write reviews, there are generally 2 groups: the people who are really, really happy and the people who are not, which is why reviews tend to bulk at the top and the bottom. So, hopefully, when people are reading them, they kinda have a sense that this is not representative of the bulk of experiences, but also, if everything looks like a 1 star, well, maybe that's something people might flag, if they're, going through and searching, dental practice in Poughkeepsie, New York.
yeah. No, it's interesting. I have to get a medical specialist, so I'm reviewing different of course, I went to ChatGPT and I went to, obviously, Google and everything else, and there's conflicting information, right? So ChatGPT is edifying this one doctor, you know, or series of doctors, and then you go out to Google, you look him up, and then you look at his reviews, and he's got, like, 2.5 stars, and then you read all this stuff, and you're just like, "Maybe" I mean, he could be, but the problem is, the
Who wrote those? Were like the 4 people who we saw out of 500 who were unhappy. No one else wrote the review.
Right, right.
That's why, I always take these things kind of with a grain of salt is, the people who write the reviews tend to not be happy or are extremely happy.
Well, and it's here's what I tell everybody is, like, if you don't do anything, um, all the negative is gonna show up. It's just the way it's the human condition, right? So if you have a room of 100 people, there's 2 people that, somebody kicked their cat and they're not happy, and they're never gonna be happy type of deal. And, you just look at them and they're gonna write you a negative review. You have to proactive, and this is kinda what you do, on a lot of levels, right? Not just reviews, but everything. You have to proactively go out and be that person that's shaking hands and, you know, being a greeter, being gregarious.
Virtually and in person.
Yeah.
I love in-person communications. I tell people leave behinds are great. Pens are one of the most underrated things. You could leave them anywhere. No one will question if like there's a corporate pen at, the milk bar at the Starbucks where people put cream in their coffee. Someone just left the pen behind. Yeah, you left that pen behind intentionally because you know someone's going to pick it up. They're great, and because no one questions when someone finds a pen. Now everyone's going to listen to this and question every pen they ever see, but they're great. They're leave behinds. I get all the time hangers, for home services companies, who want to that we're in your neighborhood. It's like okay, you know what? They wouldn't spend money on printing these if it didn't work.
Yeah, and you could do I mean, you could do creative stuff like, not to nerd out too much, but I mean, anything related to phones, iPhones. If you wanna give away a free case, and somebody puts it on their case, they're gonna be seeing that, right? Or some kind of attachment that goes with the phone that's helpful, a kickstand or whatever the case is. Um, to your point, I mean, that's a great promotional leave behind.
Promotional stuff that people use every day, you know, is great because they use it. And usually they don't care where the pain came from. They don't care where a case came from, in a lot of depending on what they're doing. It's a little phone case. It's, when I was doing production a lot more, lens cloths, were something that everyone was giving away because everyone had a bag of them because they got lost all the time and they cost pennies each.
Yeah, no, and that yeah, when you think about what we interact with the most, if you find a way yeah, if you gotta find a way to, you know, attach to that, that's a cool gizmo that helps somebody, and can promote your business. I mean, you're halfway there. So, um, well, interesting. And I guess one of the topics I wanted to cover before you head out, we brushed on a little bit, is AI. Do you see I mean, there seems to be 2 schools of thought. Um, People are losing their mind about AI in terms of, you know, oh my goodness, SEO is done. Um, and then the others are like ignoring it completely, saying, don't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about. Where do you position yourself in that area?
Neither. So I guess I'm the third camp on this. Um, it's a great tool. It is a useful tool. I use it. I use it personally. I use it professionally. It can make a passable first draft of something that requires a lot of editing. It can do a pretty good detailed outline, which is all I would ever treat one of their first drafts like. It can do research incredibly fast, which saves me time, which saves clients money because we can, put in just basic information, find me all of this stuff about competitors in this city, nearby cities, and it'll run, and that's great. All of that has to be checked. It also makes things up. It even comes with a disclaimer, our AI hallucinates. Verify everything. So we do, but it is just a tool like everything else is a tool. You can use it well and responsibly, and it can help you. It can also have, very negative consequences. And, I'm thinking like those lawyers who used it to write briefs and they submitted it to the court and it just made up cases. That was not a good outcome for AI.
No, and it sounds like if you're going to really dig into AI, you better study prompt engineering, and how you phrase the question, or else you're going to be get in trouble pretty quick.
Get in trouble quick. And a lot of times, if you just say, do this, it doesn't work. I found if you say, help me, ask me questions targeted at this is my goal, it can do better. Not great all the time, but you could say, this question isn't relevant. Or I focus more on B2B, and this question is much more B2C in that regard, where, and then it could fix it. And it's more of a conversation. Again, it could still be making up the results. You need to check whatever it spits out because it could be completely wrong and unhelpful.
So my question to you, as because your background is in journalism, right? And so you have a trained mind to approach things different than, let's say, us lay people. That being the case, I mean, how do you approach AI with, again, with your trained mind versus what advantages or perspectives do you have there? I mean, any that could probably help any of this.
I tell it, for everything I say, show me the sources. That's one. It has to show me the sources. And if it's Wikipedia, that is usually not particularly good because anyone can edit that and it could say anything. So I say, I tell the things I would start searching. If I need demographics of a region, I say search, the US Census Bureau and these major cities and the State Department of Vital Statistics for this. I direct it to what I would do. It just does it much faster than I could for 30 cities and metro areas across the US. That would take me days to do thoroughly and then check everything. It can do that, you know, well in an hour. It's really good at cleaning up and comparing lists. If you have two sets of data and you need to compare them, show me everything in A that's not in B. It can do that relatively fast. And you could, Excel can do that too. But you could say ignore spaces, ignore capitalization, and you could write all these formulas in Excel. You could write all them in, Python and programming languages. You don't need to know how to do the programming side to do it with natural language. So it's really good for that. If you have a database that has duplicates, triplicates, cleaned up, cells are messy, it has partial names, it can do that very well. Um, but in terms of, write me a corporate communication strategy from scratch, no. In part because it only knows what's been put into it. If you're having a problem, like people are finding you because they're inputting, dentist in Poughkeepsie, New York, well, it doesn't necessarily know why you're having that problem or how to think about ways around it to find other keywords. If you ask it, give me related keywords, it might say dental pain, tooth pain, oral health, but it might not come up with everything, especially kind of tangential, just general health keywords, general, living keywords that you would understand as a person because you live and you have a mouth and you go to the dentist, so you know what people are thinking about. And that's where it kind of falls down. Will it ever be able to do that? I don't know. I am not an AI engineer. Um, I've heard both. Yes, it will, replace human thought, and absolutely not. It cannot ever. So I take both those positions and stay on the safe side.
Yeah, I think we're early in the deal. I think it's evolving. I don't think it's as far as people think it is right now. I don't think it's close. And the scary part is there's a bit of an echo chamber that goes on in terms of AI is pulling from the internet. The internet is stuff people are creating stuff on the internet with AI, and then there's this kind of spiral, right?
Yeah, it's the zombie internet. It's just AIs and bots talking to each other. AI is sourcing, it loves to source Reddit. It loves Reddit. The problem is anyone can post anything on Reddit, including bots that are posting with AI that's trained on Reddit. So you're ending up with very circular answers. One guy I work with, I know him through a professional organization here in the DC area. He said, put into different AI models, the cow jumped over the blank and see what replaces it. How it fills in the blank. We humans know what should go there. The bots have. I tried it. It came up with some very interesting examples. And one gave me just a string of emojis.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I interviewed one of the ex-directors from Google a couple episodes back. He was in charge of the GVPs, Brad Weatherall, and he had some pretty interesting thoughts. And basically, him and I kind of discussed that some of the better AIs like Gemini are trying to pull from validated human sources. And Reddit is to some degree, it's not. I get it's not perfect, but and in the world of SEO, it's giving more credit to, let's say, businesses that might be registered with the Chamber of Commerce or certain other entities that require some effort to get registered with. I don't know if that makes sense. But it just seems like I think the theme is with some of these whether it's LLMs or whatever that they're trying to pull data that's vetted more. There's hurdles to get a human validation of whatever the topic is, and it sounds as if they're trying to do that with Gemini because it's not as prolific as some of the others, but it tends to be a lot more conservative, I guess, is what people are saying.
So I'll tell you something about Gemini. I was trying to edit a photo. This was a photo of me, and I have all the rights to do this. It's a me. I'm not creating anything malicious. Um, and Gemini was the only model that said, we will not do this. Every other model just created something that looked cartoony and terrible. You could create a fake person. You could say, show me a, you know, white middle-aged man and with glasses, and it'll do it. If you say edit this photo, it will, to look like, make these changes. Only Gemini straight out said, our protections do not allow this. Every other model just made it look terrible. Like you could never use it and pass it off as a real person. So in that way, Gemini definitely more conservative. Um,
Yeah, and I think there's gonna be, I don't know, maybe it's out there already, but, I think there's gonna be somebody that can make money off the fact that um, that can lock down your image in whether it's blockchain or whatever, that, so nobody can replicate or you can prove that that's a replication of it's not you or whatever the case is. whether it's your voice, whether it's your image, and other pieces that, AI can somehow duplicate or replicate, so to speak. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. The next couple of years will be will be fun, that's for sure. Well, cool. So what is your sweet spot? Now, just so everybody knows, if you're watching this on YouTube, we're gonna have a QR code so you can get a hold of Joshua in his firm. And if you're listening, unfortunately, well, they'll be in the show notes on how you can get a hold of Joshua with a link to his firm. But is there are there certain niches that you think you're stronger at, for various businesses that you're like, this is a slam dunk. We can for sure help these type of businesses.
Startups, anyone in that startup ecosystem, whether they're, making chips or they have an app or they're, you know, they have a physical device, for consumers or businesses, definitely anyone in that space. Once you kind of reach the Series B, you've probably brought our function in-house already. So the kind of seed, pre-seed, pre-series A, Series A stage companies. Or if you're not going for that type of, letter round funding, roughly in that place if you were. Because a lot of companies are now kind of looking for alternative sources of funding as opposed to letter rounds. The legal industry, legal services, and law firms. Like I say, spent years at the U.S. Department of Justice, working specifically with hate crimes and civil rights. But all sorts of legal issues are definitely right in that space. And green energy, worked in that before, and healthcare, med tech as well. Um, Definitely are things where we can help. But also, if you're kind of just at that stage, like we're having some communications challenges, give us a call. We, can probably help you with something because most business problems are pretty, similar across business. You're all trying to raise money. Or if that's where if you're in a fundraising type business, if you're trying to get customers, you're trying to improve your website, you're trying to get on social media. The differences are important, but a lot of those core fundamentals, and I'm sure you've seen this, kind of stay the same, especially with your businesses of, this kind of size.
Yeah, and it is interesting. One of the things I was going to ask you, obviously, there's a lot of AI startups. I don't know if you're working with any of them or what have you. I mean, are you seeing the ones that have a good formula are more focused on kind of creating agents for a specific industry or application, or like, or it seems like the ones that are struggling to have a generalist product. You can kind of do a lot of things, but people just don't know what to do with it, right?
So I use a couple of AI tools. Some are very generalist. You know, you create workflows because I use custom workflows a lot. Um, and a lot of it is make a custom workflow to do pretty much anything. If you don't know how to make that workflow, because I do have a background in some programming in tech, so I kind of understand how that can work, and it helps. It's certainly not required. But I found ones that, email alert workflows. All they do is help you sort your inbox. Uh, that might be better for the average user. I haven't seen, because they're so new and there are so many of them, I have not seen that, one is by far and away better than the others. Um, seen that, at least for my own use, ones that are simpler, even just with making fairly open-ended workflows that are just, simpler to use and do that one thing very well. And I like this across the board, do that one thing well. You make workflows. That's it. That's all this does. That, I find to be more useful than, well, we can make workflows and have, an LLM and do projects and have multiple teams and have sub projects. Like now it's just gotten very complicated, but because they want to get everything. But at least for what we're doing, very narrowly tailored, um, but yet open ended. It just really focuses on making that one thing easy.
Right. Right. I agree with you in that you can, there's a lot of great tools out there, and software or whatever, but I think it becomes overwhelming for the average small business owner, and it might even be inexpensive to get into it, but then they find out they need to they need to hire a programmer or an engineer.
Yeah, they need a programmer and they buy a lot of credits because these things work on credits, which can get very expensive very fast. You know, I have a lot of these templates already built, and it's, change out, your company for this other company. And, that also, but it already is set to, search for, what's going on today, search for current keywords, search for what's important, tell me these things. I want to just send me by email. I can do social media posts per client with designated email addresses. So it all is coming from email, where I don't have to log into accounts, which means I can do this easily from anywhere. Um, and all it does is send me drafts. It tells me here are things that people are doing. Here are some key ideas that, you might want to write about. And then I write the final content. My team works on this because I'm not putting out, an AI written post as a final post. It has never, like I said, it can do a passable first draft. It can do a decent outline. It was not writing even Twitter posts good enough that I would say, this is what I want out there.
Yeah, no, I battle with it. I mean, like you said, it's just, instead of going home and watching TV, I'll take a half hour and just bounce ideas off it, um, and then, to your point, really ask it to poke holes in a concept, right? Try to bring up all the faults and failures, and then, it just gives you ideas on what to research and cross check, and, um, but to me, it's somewhat of a good thing to bounce things off. It tends to be biased towards, "Oh, yeah, you can do that," type of deal.
Yeah. And they found that in a lot of cases where it is very, I don't call it self-reinforcing. It is very user reinforcing. If you prompt it and it gets the sense, especially from your history, that you like certain things, it will gear you in that direction. Unfortunately, I wanted to gear me away from that because that's where my bias is. And, one of the things that, you learn, in communications, especially in journalism school and working as journalists, what are your biases? What are you thinking about? And sometimes that can drive you to a story that's really good news. Other times it has the opposite effect. So these AI agents can really push you into your bias further. I just did a test, just to see kind of how it was doing that because I've been reading about this. And I said, show me how, this public figure is connected to this controversial organization. There were no connections. I made this up. It gave me a lot of detail about how these two things are connected because it understood from the prompt. I assume there's a connection. So it found very tenuous, like they're both on Twitter type connections. Like, well, okay, thank you. That doesn't mean they're connected, but it assumed from the prompt that that there had to be something.
Well, and I wanna be mindful of your time, so I'm gonna just try to land the plane here if that's alright, but before I do, I'm kinda curious, it's kinda off topic, but obviously, journalism is changed over the last, for sure, 10 years, right? Possibly even 20 years. Um, where do you see that going? I mean, you have the Joe Rogans that are now more influential, let's say, than Barbara Walters was, or Walter Cronkite, or you know what I mean? And then there's this, I don't know where the public's perception is of, let's say, the common news channels. I don't think it's very good. I mean, at least for me, I kinda, on all sides, whether it's conservative or otherwise, I mean, w where do you see things going? Do you see it becoming more fragmented and information becoming, harder to get the truth, so to speak. I mean, where do you see things going?
I think it'll be more fragmented. Absolutely. You see this with Substack already, which has been around much longer than it's been really popular. It took off a few years ago, but it is an older platform. And a lot of people, podcasters, they have their Substack newsletters. They have, where they're posting, they go live on Substack, once, twice a day in some cases. You'll see a lot more of that because people can pay $1 a month, $10 a month to, one person or one small entity's Substack. But they're still getting their information from somewhere. So the big publications, they'll probably still be here in name, probably still in function. How much, viewership they get, that will change. What they cover, I think, will change, and how they cover it. You look at, the big newsrooms, they still have, their traditional, channels, but they're all on the major social media platforms doing things in ways that are much more bite-sized. They're still doing, big reporting, but they're also leaning into, podcasts. They're leaning into, they've always had opinion pages, but they've got, much more, kind of opinion contributors in some cases now. You know, they'll take the controversial op-ed because they know it'll generate controversy, which again, that's not new by any means. But that itself feeds off of what they have. So it'll change, it'll keep changing. You know, we think about old media that it was, oh, well, no, just what we kind of remember. It changed. There were a lot of changes in the early 20th century, a lot of changes in the mid 20th century, a lot of changes in the late 20th century, and a lot of changes before that. So it was never nearly as stagnant as we kind of mythologize.
Yeah, I mean, even Benjamin Franklin, right, kind of, exploited what he could with his newspaper or whatever, and so yeah, no, it's fascinating, and I try to pull because I know I'm biased, one way or the other, and
We all are. We are all by it.
yeah, a buddy of mine told me, he goes, "No, man, you gotta start getting your news from the BBC as it relates to the United States, or Al Shahir, or El if I'm pronouncing it right. What is it? El Jahar? The the
Al Jazeera.
J Al I'm sorry, Al Jazeera. It's late in the day here, so but ultimately, um, just, pulling information from all these sources, and it goes back to AI, right? In terms of that there's not a perfect, perfect news organization or what have you. But
No, perfect doesn't. I tell this to every client too. We live in the real world. Perfect in any context does not exist. If you're looking for the perfect strategy, the perfect execution, the perfect everything with no errors in any way, it will not happen. It can't. We are human. We live in the world of people. Perfect cannot exist. We get as close as we can. And that's all of us in every context, personal, professional, everything.
no, it's definitely a struggle, but, I do think we live in pretty good times. We just have to think a little bit, which always requires some energy. If you see something on Facebook and it falls in line with your thinking and everything else, you might wanna go check Google and make sure.
Even if it doesn't, check, you know, just check. You know, one of the things, in journalism school is like when someone tells them, like, does it pass the smell test? Like, does this just sound right to you? And a lot of times, even if you agree with it, it's like, well, maybe it doesn't sound completely right. There might be some basis in truth, but that then went a little further. So always check before, you hit share and put it out further. And
Yeah, and I don't know, I would say when I do that, I would say 70% of the time, if it fits my agenda and I check it, I'd say 70% of the time I end up not sharing it just because it's not accurate, not even close, so that I think once we all kind of realize that, one, hopefully we don't spend as much time on some of those social deals. And then when we do, we're conscious about what we're sharing. But it just seems like most of my friends that are retired are like constantly, sharing stuff that fits their agenda, which most of the time it's not accurate. But okay, well, Joshua, it's been great having you on. Again, people can get a hold of you if you're watching on YouTube here. There should be a QR code up in the corner. If you're listening, there should be show notes where you can get a hold of Joshua. He's Joshua Altman. You're on what, Twitter, I assume? You're on everything?
Mostly on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Mostly LinkedIn. You can find me at, linkedin.com/in/Joshua I Altman. Also, email me, jaltman@beltway.media. Really easiest way to reach me, just email.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, again, I appreciate your time, and that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching Local SEO Tactics podcast. If you found this episode valuable, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss new insights. We've got more expert tips on SEO, AEO, and digital marketing strategies coming your way every week. Want to dive deeper? Check out our other videos right here, or grab our free resources in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in, and remember, staying ahead online starts right here.